Greetings and welcome to this virtual launch of the Blue Carbon Handbook on blue carbon as a nature-based solution for climate action and sustainable development. This event is organised by the High-Level Panel for a Sustainable Ocean Economy, or the Ocean Panel for short, and in collaboration with the Blue Carbon Initiative and the International Partnership for Blue Carbon. The handbook was commissioned by the Ocean Panel to establish a reference guide to help non-specialists gain an understanding of blue carbon and in turn support decision-making towards the goal of accelerating ocean action. This has been a collective endeavour, and I extend my thanks and gratitude to the group of blue carbon experts who have collaborated to author this handbook, consolidating key information on topics ranging from the technical potential of blue carbon ecosystems for climate mitigation to setting out new developments on carbon markets and the importance of high quality principles, from highlighting the wide range of local adaptation and resilience benefits to setting out the global policy landscape to advance ocean action towards climate, biodiversity and sustainable development goals. To briefly introduce myself, I'm Stephanie Ockenden, Global Policy Lead for the Ocean Programme at the World Resources Institute, and where it's my honour to be moderating today's event alongside a distinguished panel. Before we jump into the substance of the webinar, it's my duty to firstly share a few brief housekeeping items. Firstly, today's report, along with all other knowledge products commissioned by the Ocean Panel, are available on the Ocean Panel website, that's oceanpanel.org, or please see the links in the chat box. Secondly, we hope to have time to respond to your questions, and so I encourage you to post your questions in the question box allocated at the bottom of your screen. Please indicate which panelist you would like to respond, if you do have a preference, and be sure what you write is a question. Thirdly, today's webinar has been recorded, and you will receive a message within the next week for details to access this. And lastly, we welcome engagement through the webinar on Twitter using the hashtag #BlueCarbon. By way of introduction, for those of you who haven't joined us before, let me start with a brief overview of the Ocean Panel. Established in September 2018, the High-Level Panel for a Sustainable Ocean Economy represents 17 serving world leaders, co-chaired by the Prime Minister of Norway and President of Palau, with support from the UN Secretary-General's Special Envoy for the Ocean. As you can see from the map, the Ocean Panel is truly unique, comprising members from across the world, nations large and small, across all ocean basins, at every stage of economic development, at every extreme of the ocean environment, from the tropics to the Arctic. The Ocean Panel together collectively account for 50% of the world's coastlines, 44% of the world's exclusive economic zones, 26% of the world's fisheries, and 20% of the world's shipping fleet. The Ocean Panel aims to facilitate a better, more resilient future for people and the planet. The goal to deliver a sustainable ocean economy where effective protection, sustainable production, and equitable prosperity go hand in hand. The means through 100% sustainable management of national waters, guided by sustainable ocean plans. The Ocean Panel has been working to achieve its key objectives through harnessing the latest ocean knowledge and developing an action agenda for transitioning to a sustainable ocean economy. And in demonstration of this commitment, we launched today the Blue Carbon Handbook. With this, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. Firstly, Ben Milligan, one of our co-leading authors of the Blue Carbon Handbook. Ben is the Director of the Sustainable Development Reform Hub at the University of South Wales. And I'm also delighted to welcome the following experts who will join us in discussion to bring blue carbon to life. I warmly welcome Izar Ali, who is an ocean specialist in the Office of the Prime Minister of Fiji, Steve Clark, who is Director of Blue Carbon and International Partnerships at the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water in Australia, Leah Glass, who is Technical Advisor on Blue Carbon at Blue Ventures, and Denny Ridwan, Director of Government Debt Securities at the Ministry of Finance, Indonesia. Dear panel, thank you for joining us today. And now I give the floor to Ben to guide us through the key messages and findings of this handbook.
Thank you much, Lee, Stephanie, and hello from Darawal country in New South Wales, Australia. It's a real privilege for me to be representing the distinguished author group behind this document, and it falls upon me this afternoon, Australian time, to highlight some of the key messages that are documented in the knowledge resource that we've been working hard on over the past few months, and to set the scene for the real experts who are on our discussion panel to talk about some of the practical implications of the messages in the report. And this report is intended fundamentally to support action. That's why it was conceived. The High Level Ocean Panel is an action-focused, politically led organizations. And one of the many ambitious commitments made by the Ocean Panel leaders was this one, which you see on screen, which talks about marine and coastal ecosystems being healthy, resilient, and productive as nature-based solutions, another key term throughout the report, and integrating those into development of coastal infrastructure. Development of coastal infrastructure, of course, being a transformative change as populations and economic activity intensify all around the world. And there's a few things we set out in the report that are by now well known. So one is that marine and coastal ecosystems are fundamental to our way of life as life support systems, and they provide a whole host of benefits, scientifically often referred to as ecosystem services, to underpin societal wealth and well-being. And some of these are irreplaceable. Some of them we just can't replace ecology with technology. And these vital resources for our way of life and communities and countries around the world are threatened by diverse pressures: land use change, climate change itself, sea level rise, pollution, invasive species, and many others. And it depends, the pressures vary or threats vary in every context. And because these challenges are so well known, there's a whole range of institutions and communities around the world that are mobilizing more and more every year to address the challenge. And the High Level Panel commitments are a political manifestation of that. But there's a whole range of others which are less visible in webinars like this one at a really community level, where people all around the world are really coming together practically to confront some of the immense challenges we face in terms of safeguarding ecosystems for future generations and to support our way of life. And one of the things that these ecosystems do is they sequester and store carbon. They're really important contributors to mitigation of climate change. They support adaptation of climate change. And the handbook is all about how we leverage those carbon-related benefits of marine and coastal ecosystems as a nature-based solution for not only climate change itself, because they store carbon, but for broader sustainable development. How can we invest properly in conservation, restoration, and enhancement of these blue carbon ecosystems, another term in the report, for practical development gain. And so the information we present in the report is really geared towards that end. Finally, it's intended to inform the panel's goal. So let me tell you a little bit more about the summary and the handbook, which are the two documents that will be shared to everyone. And I think they're now live. Someone correct me if I'm mistaken. So we talk about terminology, we summarize the science, we look at the international political and policy context related to blue carbon. Over the past 10 years in particular, there's been a rapid growth in the number of policies internationally and nationally that try to take a step on this journey towards better management of blue carbon ecosystems for sustainable development. And those are characterized by their complexity. There is not necessarily a collective understanding globally of all the different commitments, how they relate to one another across different international conventions, across national policy. So we tried to really summarize that in the report. And we also look at opportunities for scaling investment in implementing blue carbon ecosystem focused projects. What are some of the options and opportunities for accessing finance that is critical for scaling our investment in conservation, restoration, or enhancement? What are some of the safeguarding questions or ethical questions or guardrails we need to be aware of as we think about how to leverage finance for supporting these management objectives? So there's a strong focus on the report on the practical operational project level, also at the policy level, informed by the science, and we try and help readers orient themselves to that complex context, which was also complex for every single author involved in the study. It was an exercise in us all learning from each other. The final thing I'll say in the summary of what the report focuses on is that we try not to make the report the be-all and end-all or the final point of reference. It is important to recognize there is a huge range of literature and useful material out there now related to blue carbon ecosystems and associated governance and finance issues. And the report acknowledges that. We have a frequently asked questions section, and the handbook is intended as an entry point rather than a definitive statement in the way that, for example, the IPCC reports or IPBES reports need to be because of how they're managed. So that's the report in general. Let me tell you a bit more now about some of the actual key findings in the report related to the benefits of blue carbon ecosystems and their climate change implications. I mentioned before that they're really important natural assets. They provide environmental, social, and economic benefits. What are some of those? Blue carbon ecosystems are really important for provisioning services. They are sources of food, fuel, and fiber for communities, larger communities and countries and globally. They have really important regulation and maintenance functions. They sequester and store carbon, for example. If we degrade the systems, we lose those services. They protect from storms and flooding. They regulate water quality. They are spawning grounds for many economically valuable fisheries all over the world. So there is this diversity of benefits and management of the systems that improves the status of the ecosystem can therefore yield a range of benefits for local and national and also global development. The title of the report is on blue carbon, so let me talk a bit more specifically about the blue carbon side of their importance. How much do blue carbon ecosystems store? Well, the science is getting better and better every year, but we're still talking in ranges. So 6 to 12 gigatons of carbon, roughly. That, to put that in context, it's important not to overstate the climate change benefits of blue carbon ecosystems in the context of the much broader challenge of solving climate change. This is not an advocacy piece in this report. They have significant role to play, but we're never going to be able to solve the climate crisis from a mitigation perspective alone using blue carbon ecosystems. That's not what this is about. But we could make efforts towards solving climate change much harder if these systems end up being degraded. So some of the headline figures there, we could be preventing up to 0.5 gigaton per annum of emissions if we stop degradation of the systems. If we restore blue carbon ecosystems, we could be sequestering an additional gigaton or so per annum of carbon dioxide emissions. So these are important numbers, but we need to view blue carbon ecosystems as part of a broad suite of climate measures, and also recognizing that the carbon-related services can be leveraged to provide a whole range of other benefits. So this is thinking about carbon in context, not just about carbon in silo. And that's particularly important when it comes to thinking about the community management side of this issue. And the final thing I'll say here is that we're not operating in the absence of political will in this context. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change has a lot now to say, and the Paris Agreement and all of those other climate-centric commitments now have a lot to say about these ecosystems. The Convention on Biological Diversity, most recently the Montreal Kunming Biodiversity Framework, also has a lot to say about the importance of these ecosystems and measuring and investing and managing these. And what our global leadership are calling for really in this space is accelerated action. So the question is, if global leadership is really calling for accelerated action, what do we do? How do we take advantage of the carbon-related benefits of blue carbon ecosystems to yield a broad range of benefits? So let me say a few more about those, and then I am almost at the end of my presentation. Carbon markets around the world are growing rapidly, and these provide opportunities for financing practical conservation, restoration, and enhancement of marine and coastal ecosystems. And it's really important to capitalize on these opportunities to the extent appropriate and to the extent equitable if we're going to leverage and create the resources needed to address this critical management challenge. In voluntary carbon markets, the credits related to blue carbon are still quite a small slice of the global market. So for example, one of the major private sector voluntary market providers, Vera, only 0.15% of their credits issued in terms of emissions relate to blue carbon. So blue carbon ecosystem related finance under voluntary carbon markets is small, but that's also very exciting because it creates a lot of opportunity for growing the investment in these systems. So why is it important to think about blue carbon? Because how we engage with climate finance can help us have ecosystem-based outcomes. And it's important to recognize in this context that there are a range of important barriers to entry for growing investment through carbon markets, whether they be voluntary or regulated markets. We need to keep moving forward as fast as possible on making the science more rigorous about the carbon implications of marine and coastal ecosystems, how much carbon is stored, how much is sequestered. There's been enormous progress on that in recent years, but there's always more work to do. We also need to do a better job at accounting for the range of other ecosystem services that these systems provide so that we understand the multiplier effect across sustainable development more generally of a carbon-centric investment. And then finally, we need to be thinking about barriers to entry for the organizations, public sector, private sector, local communities, entering carbon markets for blue carbon ecosystem management. High startup and feasibility costs. There are limited measurement reporting and verification capacities at an operational level. There is uncertainty and risk related to adverse weather events, related to general environmental change. And also, we need to think about how to create project pipelines. So not just think about individual small-scale projects. How can we create strategic initiatives to develop small-scale projects that can be aggregated into portfolios, for example, for institutional investments? That's the carbon-centric investment. Another thing we focus on in the report is that there are a whole host of opportunities for integrating blue carbon and nature-based solutions more generally into coastal infrastructure development. If we are developing new ports and financing those as part of an adaptation strategy or a development strategy, what is the role that mangroves, for example, can play in development of that port to create an ecosystem services and carbon benefit on top of the port development? And the background image here, which is from Fiji, near Nadi, is a good example of that kind of integration, a small scale port with mangroves around the frontage. So we need to think about not just carbon in isolation from a finance point of view, but really mainstreaming blue carbon into coastal infrastructure development. And that requires a lot of effort and engagement with the investment pipelines and the technical expertise in those projects. And we also need principles. That's going to be my next point, which is if we're going to leverage finance into management of blue carbon ecosystems, that finance must be really working properly from a transparency point of view, from an equity point of view, for the communities who ultimately are the custodians of the relevant ecosystems and who ultimately are most affected by the status of those ecosystems. So one of the things we talk about in the report is the high quality blue carbon principles and guidance. This is a lot of hard work from a multi-stakeholder coalition that try and set out in a practical way what factors should you ensure are met when you are delivering a blue carbon related investment. And if you are investing in blue carbon through carbon markets and other markets, what things do you need to look at from an ethical investment point of view to ensure that money is delivering sustainable development outcomes, not just isolated financial development outcomes? So we talk through those in the report in some detail. And then this is all really hard to operationalize. Everyone is facing that challenge around the world. And in the spirit of Sustainable Development Goal 17, we all need to be working together on all of these issues. And fortunately, as in the blue carbon space, we benefit from a range of international partnerships where different organizations, public sector and private sector and civil society, are really starting to come together to help tackle these systemic challenges in a practical way. And there are scientific and technical collaborations related to blue carbon ecosystems, some of which you see on screen. There are others which are more focused on designing policy to support blue carbon management. And then there are a host of others focused on leveraging finance. And these all interrelate to one another in different ways. We try and describe those in the report to ensure that people reading the report have a sense of where they can go to for collaboration and support and guidance and to be part of a community rather than tackling this in isolation. And the last thing I'll say before wrapping up, one of the really nice things about this work is that, and as one of the coordinating lead authors, is just the depth and breadth of expertise that fed into this report. So I'd particularly at this point like to acknowledge the 21 co-authors of this work, all of which were deep experts in some of the specialist subjects, and it's a testament to their dedication that we were able to get this report done in such short time for hopefully the benefit of those who are responsible for taking action to measure and manage and invest in these ecosystems so we can have blue carbon management for the future we want for our ocean. So with that, I'll hand back to WRI colleagues for facilitating an exciting discussion panel. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ben. And again, massive thanks to yourself and all authors. In a short presentation, you've done an incredible job at giving a real tour of this extensive handbook. I would really encourage the audience to read this handbook. You can read it cover to cover, or you can jump into key aspects. It's an invaluable resource, and it really does a great job at stepping you through, as Ben highlighted, some of those really complex issues, but in a very user-friendly way. It's a wealth of resource there. In turning to the panel, I'm going to first put a question to Steve. We've now heard from Ben on the handbook, on the theory, on the practice, but I wonder, Steve, if you could bring to life what interests Australia, what benefits do blue carbon ecosystems provide?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, look, Australia has a strong interest in conserving and restoring blue carbon ecosystems. We're a large island continent. We're one of the longest coastlines on Earth, supporting abundant and diverse blue carbon ecosystems. We're generally considered a blue carbon hotspot. We have roughly 12% of the world's blue carbon ecosystems in Australia. We also recognise that these ecosystems provide a range of benefits to climate biodiversity and people, and Ben's alluded to those in his opening presentation. So, just to recap, obviously the term blue carbon recognises the ability of these ecosystems to capture and store large amounts of carbon. In 2022, Australia released its first national ocean ecosystem accounts, and estimated that our mangroves and seagrass meadows alone sequestered over 14 million tonnes of carbon in 2021. That's the equivalent of about 4 million cars. These ecosystems are also critical for biodiversity. Again, as Ben mentioned, they provide essential breeding grounds for fish, habitat and food for iconic threatened species such as sea turtles and dugongs, and also feeding and staging grounds for migratory birds, just to list a few. These ecosystems also provide a range of other benefits, including improving water quality by filtering water flowing into our oceans and reef systems, including the Great Barrier Reef, sustaining coastal livelihoods by supporting fishing, recreational fishing, as well as commercial fishing, and also tourism opportunities. They provide coastal protection from sea level rise and storm surges. And these ecosystems also hold significant cultural benefits for our First Nations people here in Australia. So obviously realising positive outcomes for these ecosystems will be crucial in reaching our goals under the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework, and to address broader environmental and social challenges. So to this end, we are supporting research on ground restoration at home and around the world, and developing innovative financing solutions for nature repair and supporting collaborative action.
Thank you, Steve. You've really brought to life blue carbon there, and also really highlighted that importance of understanding the natural capital and the benefits that these blue carbon ecosystems provide, that importance of knowledge, of science, of evidence. We've got to know what we need to protect. I'm going to step us back now from the shores of Australia. And as you mentioned, the global community has secured significant outcomes to protect nature at the end of last year. And most recently, blue carbon was a focus topic under the UNFCCC Ocean Climate Dialogue. Isar from Fiji, Fiji has led with others, really led the way in terms of bringing a greater prominence to the ocean in these international negotiations. And I wondered if you could share with us your views on how international goals and commitments, such as those under the UNFCCC and the new Global Biodiversity Framework, how they can drive forward domestic action.
Thank you, Steph, and Nisa Bluvinalka, to everyone joining from across the globe. I think it's critical to understand that and note rather that both frameworks play a very critical role in guiding countries on how they should best align their domestic policies and actions with more global initiatives and objectives. However, it's also crucial to understand that countries' circumstances are different, and the ability for these nations to deliver on their climate change ambitions are often significantly challenged by the resources that they may have. Be that as it may, there are certainly ways in which both the UNFCCC and the GBF, for short, drive domestic action. Some of these are monitoring, reporting, and verification, for one. International commitments more often than not require countries to provide reports. Fiji provides reports on our NEPs, on our NDCs, and so on. And this is by way of updating the global community on our progress, on the commitments that we have made. Now, this creates a community of practice that ensures there is transparency and accountability. Moreover, publicly reporting only boosts confidence in the people of your country that yes, the government is actually delivering on its climate change promises. Secondly, financing and technical support. As I mentioned earlier, countries' circumstances differ, and this more often than not is down to either the technical capacity or the limited financial resources, particularly for PSIDs. Now, international commitments come with technical assistance and financing support to assist least developed and developing countries. Access to these resources can assist countries in overcoming barriers and implement effective domestic strategies. Lastly, I would say that international goals and commitments create a global consensus on the need to act to address the challenges caused by climate change and biodiversity loss. This consensus can exert diplomatic pressure on countries that are in some ways behind in implementation or taking action, and function as a boost for them and encourage them to prioritize and accelerate domestic action. I'm glad that you actually mentioned the recent Ocean Climate Change Dialogue, which offered an opportunity to really have a deep dive in the blue carbon space. These dialogues provide a platform for parties and non-parties to actually exchange ideas, understand challenges and opportunities that exist in the blue carbon space and also in the broader ocean climate change nexus. And I think these dialogues really pave a way towards understanding how we can actually better accelerate and expedite domestic action. Naka.
Thank you so much, Izzar. You've really nicely highlighted there that impetus, that need to act on all global goals. And so how do we accelerate blue carbon action? It's my pleasure to next turn to Denny to share Indonesia's experience and where Indonesia is leading the way. What can governments do to promote the implementation of blue carbon projects, and what policies and mechanisms can be used?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for having me. So the government of Indonesia is committed to addressing climate change through mitigation and adaptation effort, as well as achieving sustainable development goals. And with a strong government commitment, the government has set out various policies and regulations to uphold our commitment. For example, since 2011, we launched a national action plan to reduce greenhouse gas. And three years later, in 2014, we have implemented another national action plan to adapt climate change. In 2016, the government ratified the Paris Agreements to the United Nations Frameworks Convention on Climate Change. And the latest one, in 2021, the government has striving to improve all aspects of our life, including tackling climate change, and finally finished two very important documents, which are updated NDCs and long-term strategy on low carbons and climate resilience by 2050. So the policies and regulations related to climate change are also the basis for the government of Indonesia to develop the blue sectors, including the implementations of blue carbons projects. Because the government recognizes that the blue economy can provide the solutions to the impact from climate change in the marine sector through low carbon ocean development, sustainable marine tourism, the marine energy developments, and within the context of Indonesia, the economic transformations, the blue economy covers the non-terrestrial resource management and utilizations, the green economy frameworks. And the Ministry of Finance, as the fiscal authority, is responsible for crystallizing all these attempts for sustainable blue economy. For example, in the funding side, the government has prepared the blue bonds issuance, not only to optimize the blue finance with these innovation funding tools, but also to demonstrate the broader public that Indonesia is firmly promoting for sustainable blue economy. And as you know that on May 2023, we have successfully issued our samurai bond with the debut of blue bond in 7 years and 10 years with totaling 20.7 billion Japanese yen. And the blue bond issuance in the Japanese market has received excellent response from the investors, and this issuance of blue bonds also in line with the government financing strategy to diversify our financing instrument as well as to widen the investor basis. And we expect the issuance of thematic bond by the government will serve as a model for private sectors in developing sustainable financing instruments, and we hope in the future more private issuers will follow our path for sustainable developments. I will stop here.
Thank you so much. Indonesia's experience there really highlights that journey from realizing the benefits of a sustainable ocean economy to really setting out clear governance, clear frameworks to incentivize action and mobilize finance. We applaud you on the blue bonds, and I know other speakers, in particular Fiji, kind of have also experienced there, so we look forward to hearing more. But from blue bonds, I'm going to turn to another market instrument that we've heard about a lot in the blue carbon space in terms of being able to mobilize finance, and that's the newly emerging carbon markets. And I'm going to turn to Leah, who both as a lead author to this handbook and from the wealth of experience you have from Blue Ventures, I'd really like to hear from you in terms of what opportunities and challenges do blue carbon markets present for blue carbon projects?
Thanks, Steph, and hi everyone. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, and I think an incredibly exciting topic, because we're really seeing, I think, right now the coming of age of blue carbon. We're seeing strong market demand for blue carbon credits, which at this point is not showing any signs of easing in the near term. And the other good thing is we're seeing increasing recognition through the high prices that we're getting for the credits of the really unique co-benefits that blue carbon projects deliver, which was touched on by Ben in his presentation. And this is good because it's got the potential to drive capital to where it's needed most, the tropical countries and coastal communities that are on the front line of a climate breakdown. But I think one of the other opportunities is that while it is coming of age, I see blue carbon, it is still a teenager. Other carbon markets, particularly red, they've been around for over a quarter of a century now. And I think we're in a unique position as a sector to learn from the successes and some of the mistakes made by some of the other carbon market initiatives to ensure that blue carbon credits, they're developed with high integrity from the perspective of accounting, nature, and of course, people. But yeah, with opportunities, there's obviously always challenges. And I think, the one thing to touch on in my short answer is complexity. And I see 3 components here, and the handbook, I feel, gives a really clear and pragmatic overview of some of these challenges and the complexity. The first piece would be technical complexity. So over the last couple of decades, the science behind blue carbon has moved on so far and so fast, and it's fantastic. We've now got this great basis of science to build on. But as Ben touched on, the MRV, the monitoring, reporting and verification, is still quite complicated and in some contexts is expensive, especially the all-important soil carbon component. And another piece from a complexity perspective is, I think, policy. As we work together as a world to understand Article 6 and implement it, all carbon markets are complex from the perspective of policy. But blue carbon ecosystems, they're at the interface of land and ocean. So they're often subject to particularly complex and often ambiguous set of rules, which can be a barrier to blue carbon market finance projects. Particularly regarding tenure, which is a really critical component of any blue carbon project in the carbon market. And that really leads on to the final complexity, I think, is really around the social component. These are blue carbon ecosystems are common pool resources that people depend on for food and for income. With this great interest in blue carbon credits, and there is a return on investment that has now been well established, we're seeing a real rush of investors into the space. But as Ben touched on, the demand currently far outweighs supply, and everyone's looking for these market-ready projects. So it's really important that safeguards are put in place to ensure that the countries and coastal communities aren't rushed or pressured into inequitable deals, particularly in situations where the tenure is unclear. So for me, I think all exciting opportunities become with an element of risk, and I think risk management from the perspective of governments, investors, and coastal communities is really going to be key to the success of blue carbon in the long run.
Thank you so much, Leah. You've really given us a clear example of those opportunities, those challenges, and I think underscored some of the messaging from the handbook in terms of the importance of high quality principles to really make sure the opportunity with this blue rush of finance with carbon markets does realise those benefits for people, for climate and nature. Keen to hear more from country experiences, and so next I'm going to turn back to Isa to hear more about what approach Fiji is taking to the management of its blue carbon ecosystems.
Thanks, Steph. So Fiji, along with its development partners, is taking a rather proactive approach to the conservation, mapping, and eventual trading of our blue carbon ecosystems. We are currently developing benefit sharing methods with communities that own blue carbon ecosystems, such as mangrove forests. We are also in the midst of developing a standard to assist us in the trading of blue carbon, while simultaneously developing the necessary legal environment to ensure that carbon trading is seamless, equitable, and transparent. All of this work is being done under the ambit of Fiji's Climate Change Act, which has a dedicated section on carbon sequestration under Part 10. And I encourage everyone to please do have a read through our Climate Change Act. I must also point out that property rights are central to the way the government of Fiji is progressing under the area of blue carbon. Traditional ownership of land is carefully considered before engaging in any activity, and a consultative approach is taken with all stakeholders. This certainly does pose a challenge, as views on utilizing land are often diverging, particularly when it comes to the financial returns. For example, and I might be very off with the figures here, but it makes sense to choose $50,000 for logging as compared to $10 or $5 per ton of carbon sequestered per year. So it is critical, and we are working with partners to develop ways to incentivize conservation and restoration. We believe it can work, and it must work if we are to meet the targets of the Paris Agreement and curb the implications of climate change. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Isa. You've really brought there some real policy steps and actions to unlock these benefits, to bring in standards, legal frameworks, consideration of property rights, and also that challenge of how we value the wider benefits. And so I'm going to jump us back to Leah to ask you the question, can other ecosystem services provided by blue carbon habitats, can they be monetized beyond the carbon value?
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I think that the short answer is certainly yes, and it's really exciting to see more and more investors, more and more people starting to look beyond carbon and really recognize the multitude of benefits and services that the blue carbon ecosystems provide. I think one of the most interesting ones is the fisheries component. These fisheries are incredibly important for food security and income for countries across the world. So there's a huge amount of thinking and work that can be done there, and obviously it's a big business. Something we've certainly seen emerging over the last couple of years, after a few years of a lot of talking, is the concept of biodiversity, the biodiversity ecosystem services. Some of that thinking being led by the Biodiversity Credit Alliance and the Global Biodiversity Standard, as well as Plan Vivo. But I think, one of the advantages of CO2, and one of the reasons it's been latched onto, is that biochemically, a ton of CO2 is the same anywhere in the world, which really makes it more suitable for global markets. And I think there's often a lot of pressure to develop, scalable solutions. However, I do really believe that, to create a sustainable planet, we're going to need to think about beyond initiatives that can simply go to the global scale. And I think the fisheries, the biodiversity, and the other ecosystem services that are provided by coastal ecosystems, they're often very location specific and require market solutions that are developed for that local context. That's not to diminish their importance or the potential for them, but I think, I'm really looking forward to working with people to develop such initiatives that work where they're being implemented, to fully recognize the importance of blue carbon ecosystems beyond simply carbon.
Thank you so much, Leah. So there is hope here. There are possible ways to value the wider benefits and to mobilize finance towards this cause. Next, I'm going to turn to Denny from Indonesia, who have been kind of working kind of in this broader space. We're keen to hear what best practices there are in Indonesia for encouraging the development of high quality blue carbon projects.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. So actually we learn from other countries' experience that to establish a solid foundations, we need to have a comprehensive strategy at national level. So in our case, one of the important policy document is the launch of the Blue Financing Strategy and also the launch of the Blue Economic Development Frameworks. And on the budgeting side, the Indonesian government has implemented budget tagging as a tool for climate financing since 2016. And additionally, we have developed the dynamic tagging for SDGs projects. As a result for these tagging mechanisms, we have able to track the flow of public funds into projects and activities that contribute positively to environmental and SDG indicators. Even with the support of the private financing, as we know that public finance remain crucial in our goal to pursue a more sustainable developments. On the financing side, the government has upgraded the government bond or sukuk frameworks as the basis for the issuance of green sukuks, become the SDGs government securities frameworks in 2021. And in August 2021, we published the SDG government frameworks to demonstrate how we intend to issue green and SDG securities to finance environmental and social projects. These frameworks also cover the blue aspects, which can be used as the basis for the issuance of the blue bonds. And under the frameworks, LE projects are categorized into navy blue and sapphire blue to signify high and moderate relevance respectively, encompassing sectors like waste management, marine and coastal protections, restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems, sustainable fisheries, disaster and risk reductions, marine, renewable energy, and ecotourism. And the utilization of thematic bonds for blue projects financings has been started by other issuers. For example, the first country to issue blue bond is the Seychelles archipelago in the Indian Oceans. The issuance was made in 2018 and issuance of 10-year bond rising around $15 million. And in September 2021, the Asian Development Bank also issued its first dual transit blue bonds denominated in Australia and New Zealand dollars to fund ocean-related projects in Asia and in the Pacific. So we expect that the other issuers, both sovereign and corporation, can also follow our path toward a more sustainable blue bond development. I'll stop here. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much. And with many congratulations to Indonesia for all your work in this space. And I think your great experience there of the blue bonds, the green bonds that really highlight many of those, the ways to value many of those benefits that Leah was mentioning in her earlier remarks. We've heard from across the panel and through the handbook that there are many opportunities, many challenges with blue carbon. And so I last turn back to Steve as chair of the International Partnership for Blue Carbon, and with all your wealth of experience, how can international, regional, national, local blue carbon partnerships and other initiatives help to promote the development of effective blue carbon projects?
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Look, partnerships really are absolutely critical to solve many of the challenges that we've heard about today across monitoring, reporting and verification methods, connecting investors with projects on the ground, working through policy challenges, understanding, improving our understanding of the science behind blue carbon ecosystems. Partnerships enable knowledge sharing, collaboration, drawing on the specific strengths and expertise of different actors. They help across policy domains, sharing expertise across borders based on where we're all individually at in terms of addressing blue carbon and establishing policy frameworks, and also across actors such as government policymakers, scientists, and on-the-ground practitioners. So, I think it's through the experts across these spaces working together that we can really address some of these challenges. The International Partnership for Blue Carbon is a great example of this. This partnership was established in 2015 with only 9 partners, and it's since grown to over 50. The partners are from government, from research organisations, from intergovernmental and non-government organisations. They all share a vision to conserve, restore and sustainably manage blue carbon ecosystems. And partners are helping each other in policy development and practical implementation by sharing resources on identifying gaps and barriers and finding solutions to these challenges based on their collective expertise and experience. So one of the outcomes of IPBC has been the Blue Carbon Accelerator Fund, which was launched by Australia and the IUCN, which came out of conversation between IPBC members. And essentially it is aiming to fund on-ground blue carbon projects internationally, again, to help scale up that sort of pipeline of investment-ready blue carbon projects. So, yeah, absolutely critical. I think, again, the development of this blue carbon handbook is another great example of the value of partnerships and key experts coming together and sharing their experience and expertise. The high-level principles is another great example of key experts coming together and sharing their expertise. So, yeah, again, just to reiterate, absolutely critical, Steph. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve, and to all the panel. We've now got a little bit of time to take some of the questions that the audience have kindly put to the speakers. And so I'm going to first turn to Ben. What impact does restoring blue carbon ecosystems have on carbon sequestration rates and tackling climate change at global scale?
Thanks so much, and a great question, Ratul, for putting us on the spot in terms of the detail. So I will defer to others on the panel for corrections if they want to weigh in from a more specialist perspective. My remarks are coming from a very much a general policy perspective, not being a carbon scientist of any description. But the broad position captured in the report is the following. The maintaining marine and coastal ecosystems in the long term is really important for capitalizing on their carbon potential. So mature mangrove systems, for example, and their role is more significant than early stages of restoration. But that doesn't mean that restoration isn't important. It's absolutely critical. It's just from purely a carbon perspective, the way terrestrial carbon markets work based on the ecology of tropical forests, for example, is different to the ecology of marine and coastal ecosystems. So it's important not to have a one-size-fits-all solution on these issues. That's one main point. In terms of contributions to global climate change, nature-based solutions in general, whether they are blue carbon or terrestrial in nature, are never going to be a substitute for reducing emissions. That's a really clear position in all of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. It's particularly in the case for blue carbon ecosystems. So we're not going to make a major impact on climate mitigation specifically at global scale through purely nature-based solutions. But what we do have an opportunity to do, the evidence suggests, is make really important local and broader than local scale changes to sustainable development outcomes, leveraging the opportunity for finance and resources that the carbon services present. So it's about taking advantage of the carbon potential to make pragmatic, scalable investments that yield a whole range of other benefits. And as Leah was pointing out before, there's also the important question of how do we take advantage of other services to yield those benefits, and think of carbon as a nature-based solution within a portfolio of other nature-based solutions that come from these systems. So it's all about an integrated approach and recognizing the carbon implications without thinking this is a simplistic solution to broader mitigation. It's absolutely not. Unfortunately, if it was, our job would be somewhat easier, potentially. So yeah, thanks so much. It's a really good question.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ben. We've got time for one more brief question, and it's from a colleague from Indonesia, but a far broader and important point. Leah, can you please elaborate on how communities and countries can raise funding for blue carbon projects?
Absolutely. The big topic, but I will, I'll be as brief as I possibly can. Related to blue carbon projects, I think, there are, I guess, different pots. Ben's presentation at the start highlighted that there are some funds like the Blue Carbon Accelerator Fund. The Mangrove Breakthrough Initiative is also a very interesting new initiative that's looking more at the interface of policy and finance, and ensuring that finance is channeled to blue carbon projects. I think that there are increasing number of investors that are recognizing that there are few market-ready projects, so that are happier to jump in slightly earlier in the journey than they would have done 3 or 4 years ago to help projects develop. But I think, I guess my one piece of advice would be is that this is, investment. This is a kind of a finance initiative. So really thinking about that business case. What are some of the costs that are going to be involved versus the income? So yeah, there's a lot to be drawn on in the handbook. It is a big subject, but a really a fantastic question, and encourage the attendees to have a look at the handbook, because there's some quality advice in there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Leah. You've rightly pointed out there's a whole range of considerations for blue carbon practitioners and policymakers to consider. It's incredibly difficult to sum up the wealth of discussion we've had today, but I certainly do encourage you all to download and take a read of the Blue Carbon Handbook. I'm also going to pass on the task to Steve to give a 15-second key takeaway in terms of what blue carbon key messages we all wish you to reflect on. So over to you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. I think just building on the response from Ben as well, I think blue carbon should be seen as one solution to tackling the climate change problem. But I think for mine, it's these ecosystems are amazing ecosystems, and they provide such a diverse range of benefits for climate, biodiversity, and people. And collectively, they'll be crucial for reaching our goals under a number of international frameworks, including the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework and the Ramsar Convention. So I think thinking holistically about what these ecosystems can contribute to, and I guess secondly, again reiterating, working in partnership will be critical, drawing on our collective experience and expertise to achieving these goals. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. We've had an incredible discussion today. We've heard about the global goals, the need to act, the need for political will, as well as community level action, that one size doesn't fit all, that we need an integrated and holistic approach. We need to learn from experiences on the ground, and we need important governance frameworks, standards, consideration of property rights. There are markets, there are blue bonds, a whole wealth of opportunities. And I really thank the panel and authors for bringing this to life and summarising this so fantastically in the handbook. Please do look on the website, have a read through the handbook, its summary, and you can also find out more about the Ocean Panel's work through our web pages as well. A massive thanks from me to our authors, to our panel, and to you for joining us for this virtual launch. Thank you so much, and goodbye.